Okay, Chair, when you're ready, we're now streaming live. You can start the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Debbie. Good morning and welcome to East Devon District Council's Virtual Asset Management Forum on the 1st of December 2020. I am your Chair, Councillor Paul Hayward, and I'd like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via live streaming on YouTube. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded, so please bear this in mind throughout, and may I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting, and we reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn any telephone devices off or onto silent. As this forum meeting is dependent on internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please ensure that all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. And please keep your points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and kindly don't interrupt any other speakers. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. I'll be notified of blue hands that are up. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any member of the public who wishes to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website, www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of forum members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphones? And when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Thank you. Over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start alphabetically with Councillor Arnott, please. No, I can't see him here. Councillor Hayward.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King. I don't see Councillor King here. Councillor Ledger, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt, please.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Rowland, please.
Present. Thank you, Debbie.
Great. Thank you. I can confirm we're quorate today, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Debbie. So moving swiftly on through the agenda, item 1, public speaking. Do we have any members of the public registered to speak?
No, we don't, Chair.
We don't. Okay, so we will move on through that. Item 2, minutes of the notes of the previous meeting. That's on pages 3 to 7 of the publicly available pack, and that's on the 9th of January 2020 when the last meeting of the Asset Management Forum was held. If anyone has any comments on the sets of minutes from the 9th of January 2020, will you please do so by raising your blue hand. If there are no blue hands raised, I will take this as an indication that you all agree with the minutes of the previous meeting. I can't see any. No, thank you. In that case, then the notes of the previous meetings are agreed. Item 3, we have apologies. So do we have any apologies received? I haven't received any.
I haven't received any either, Chair.
Right. Okay, so we'll mark that as none. Item 4, declarations of interest. This will be now done by a similar roll call as before. Over to you, Debbie.
Okay, Councillor Hayward first, please.
I do have a declaration in that I am the clerk to Newton Poppleford Parish Council, Newton Poppleford and Hertford Parish Council, All Saints Parish Council and Chardstock Parish Council, and those parish councils may in the future wish to avail themselves of any decisions made today under the asset transfer policy or community asset transfer policy. So that's really the declaration I need to make. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Ledger.
So I'm a member of Seaton Town Council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pratt.
No declarations.
Thank you. And Councillor Rowland, please.
None, thank you.
Thank you. And it looks as though we've just been joined by Councillor Arnott.
Wonderful.
I'll just wait for him to join and I can ask the same question.
Morning, Councillor Arnott.
Morning, Councillor Hayward.
Good morning. I'm just doing the declarations. Would you care to add a declaration, Councillor Arnott?
Apologies for lateness, technical difficulties, none that I'm aware of. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you very much. Right, back to you then, Chair. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much indeed. Item 5, matters of urgency. I have none I'm aware of. I think that's a given. Item 6, confidential exempt items. There is one item which officers recommend should be dealt with in this way, which is listed on the agenda under item 12, which for those looking at the agenda is the issue of the Marpool workshops. So that will be conducted in part B, confidential exempt items. Agenda item 7, introduction to the service portfolio and asset management priorities. So on that note, I will mute myself, and if I may pass over to the service lead for place assets and commercialisation, perhaps the longest business card we have at the District Council. Tim, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just going to present my screen, so if you can just bear with me a second, please. I would present my screen. Debbie, it's just saying host is disabled, participant screen sharing.
Okay, bear with me.
I think that's probably because I got thrown out and came back in, so.
It could be. Okay, do you want to try that again, Tim? Apologies, members.
Thank you. This looks more promising. Thank you. That's looking a lot more promising. Thank you. Okay, so this item, introduction to service portfolio and asset management priorities, is in a few different parts. Firstly, I'll provide a short presentation, but you also have, as part of your paperwork today, the service update report, outlining the current work of each of my 3 teams to hopefully give you a flavour of the priorities in the work that we do. You also have, by way of an email to AMF members yesterday, a Property Matters newsletter. This is provided quarterly in advance of each AMF meeting. Again, just to give members that flavour of the work that we're doing within the service. So perhaps if I can start my presentation, and then I can obviously pick up on any questions relating to either the presentation or the newsletter, or indeed the team updates afterwards, if that's okay. So very briefly, and I'm doing this presentation on the basis that for a number of you, you'll be fairly new to the work that we do within the service. So I'm going to keep it quite brief. I'm just going to highlight sort of who we are, what we do, and what asset management in terms of our portfolio relates to. So in terms of our service structure, we've got 3 teams. We've got on the left our property and facilities management team. So they are building surveyors, property records, facilities, and maintenance technicians. So they are, you'll see, the largest of my 3 teams, and yeah, generally deal with managing the built assets. We then have a smaller place and prosperity team, which we'll talk a little bit about towards the end of this presentation, but they deal with place-based projects. And then on the right, we have the estates team. So we have Steve Pratton heading up on an interim basis the property services team, Alison Hayward, the place and prosperity team, and Rob Harrison, the estates team on the right. I wanted just to spend a couple of minutes on this particular slide, which defines what we mean as an industry, I suppose, not just in respect of East Devon, but as an industry, what do we mean by asset management? And this is a diagram that I pulled together with my previous portfolio holder a year or two ago, which sort of sets out what asset management is, but then what does it mean for East Devon? So our strategic property aim along the top is to ensure that the council's land and property assets are managed and maintained in a consistent strategic manner that supports corporate strategy. Now, that particular property aim can relate to any organisation, public sector or private sector, really. And so it is generic, but intentionally generic. What's really key is then the bits beneath it. So in terms of asset management, what are our objectives? So the first objective is around understanding of our assets and how they perform. Secondly, disposing of assets which perform poorly. And I'm not just talking about financial performance, I'm talking about non-financial performance as well. Acquiring new assets where there's a strong business case, maintaining and investing in the existing assets, and making assets more efficient, so seeking a commercial return where appropriate. So they're the strategic objectives. And the bottom half of that page sets out how we will deliver those priorities. So again, working from left to right, retaining an asset register showing what we hold, enabling the centralisation of asset management decisions. That's key. For me, in terms of running an asset management service, that's core. Understanding what we hold and having a good, solid, reliable asset register. With that asset register, then using the data within it to inform decision making. Then using that to undertake rolling programs of options appraisals to inform protocols. And those protocols are the green, pinkish and yellow boxes. So it's around implementing a disposal and acquisitions protocol. So around disposals and acquisitions, having a core strategy that sits behind those to make sure that your decisions are strategic. Implementing an investment capital program protocol, again, making sure that decisions you make fit the strategic objectives. And then around commercialism, illustrate let property protocol. So that's around our assets that are let commercially and ensuring that we manage them in a commercial way. Now, that's not just about the rent levels, that's also around service charge recovery, debt recovery, but also about managing those properties, managing those tenants to ensure that the value of those assets are retained. So regular inspections, for example, of the properties to make sure where they're let out, to make sure that tenants are complying with their lease obligations, supporting the tenants where we can in terms of them growing. So it sort of covers all of those sorts of things. We need to measure and monitor how our assets perform financially and non-financially, which itself then feeds into the asset register. We need to manage responsive repairs to our assets in an efficient manner. So there's a balance when it comes to asset management about responsive repairs versus programmed investment and planned investment. And it's about getting that balance right. If you rely too much on, so if you don't have the data to inform your decisions, then you are very much reliant on responding when things break, roofs leak, those sorts of things, where with the data around stock condition, which for 95% of our assets plus we now have, you can be much more proactive, ultimately providing a better service, but also doing it in a more cost-effective manner. Key also is maintaining health and safety compliance. of our portfolio. Now that's a key function of our property and facilities team. And then finally, debt management. So that hopefully sort of gives you a sort of a good summary of what asset management is all about. Clearly, as a new asset management forum, you may well have a different take on particular priorities within those boxes. But broadly speaking, those sorts of things are fairly industry standard. Just very briefly, a little bit about our portfolio. Probably first thing this PowerPoint's largely developed from one that I did earlier this summer. So the figures may be slightly out now, but the broad theme's still there. So we have 465 land assets. Certainly we did at the beginning of the summer. I don't think things have changed since. On those 465 land assets, we have 434 buildings. It's probably worth just saying that in terms of this portfolio, this is the general fund portfolio, so this is not the HRA portfolio. Members and the public often, when given this information, query the number of buildings. You'll see from the numbers there that you're probably thinking to yourself, well, we have lots of land assets, we know buildings on, but then likewise, we will have some land assets, one land asset with perhaps half a dozen buildings on. So that's why the numbers are as they are. In terms of commercial rent roll, we have just over 1.1 million per annum rent roll. And we have 411 leases and licenses that we administer through the estates team. The vast majority of those are leases and licenses out, but we do have a few occasions where we lease or license assets in. A slide now around asset data. Core asset data is held on Uniform. Uniform is our asset management system, but it's not a corporate system. Therefore, it does have some constraints. There's a quote here from an earlier piece of work that I did for a previous AMF, which was around the need to work smarter, the need to understand the social and financial worth of our assets, and employing our resources where they deliver the greatest benefit, and the greatest benefit from a financial, but also from a social perspective in relation to the management of our assets. For 95% of our buildings, it's actually more than 95% now, it's approaching 100%, we now have financial performance data by asset and by asset category. So that tells us what we need to invest in our properties moving forward, and also our income profile against those properties, which gives us together a net present value to assess the financial performance. Now, just to put that into context, what do I mean by that? So we have undertaken stock condition surveys of our assets, which have identified the condition of various components, so whether it be doors, windows, roofs, walls, the services inside, and from the condition of that, we've profiled them forward by 30 years, and we've identified when we need to replace individual components, for example, windows, over that 30-year period, likewise roofs and all of the other components. And we've put financial costings against those. So where historically we will have known which properties were in good condition and which properties were in poor condition, we didn't have the understanding around the future investment spend. And for me, and for an asset management perspective, that's absolutely key, because this means that you can use the data to inform decision making. and to inform decision making in a strategic and proactive way, rather than having to respond to needing to come forward with big asks for capital spend on properties. You now have the information, so we can forward a plan. And it may well be that we want to repurpose a particular property. It might be that we decide actually the best use of that site is to dispose of it, perhaps, rather than investing in the building, perhaps. So what's important is how we, and this is the key bit for where I think we are as a service at the moment. So it's around ensuring that data is used to inform the strategy moving forward. And with the data that we have, we know that the spend, so the investment in our assets, needs to increase from previous levels unless we dispose or transfer some assets. So just to finish off, a very little bit about what each of my three teams do. So I'm going to start with the Place and Prosperity team, headed up by Alison Hayward. The team deal with place and prosperity projects across both the council's own asset portfolio, as well as through working with others, so with third parties. I'm just going to give you a list of case studies of projects that they've delivered or are delivering over the course of the last couple of years. So you've got Seaton Jurassic, Seaton Tramway, works with Seaton Tramway, Exmouth Mamhead Slipway, Exmouth Seafront, the Road Alignment, the Water Sports Centre, QDS Temporary Uses, Seaton Wetlands Link Project, One Public Estate, Honiton Hayne Lane Employment Site, Employment Land. They're now involved as a team in community asset transfer, hot draft policy, Axminster, and work within the town there, but also looking at our investment fund and strategies around beach huts, chalets, and similar. So quite a broad range of work for that small team there. And close links, probably the closest links of all of my teams, with Andy Wood's Development and Prosperity Service, but also with Street Scene and Countryside. So the estates team. The estates team manage the leased out portfolio. So they are those 400 odd leases and licenses. They manage acquisitions, disposals, estate management, statutory and non-statutory valuations, and also viability appraisals. It's worth adding that myself and a number of my team are MRICs, so we are chartered surveyors, and a number of us are also registered valuers. So hence we have quite a big focus around the statutory and non-statutory valuations of work that we can actually do in-house rather than having to outsource. Property records, strategy and policy, and also some work supporting the HRA. And finally, the property and FM team. FM being facilities management, so that's reactive maintenance, planned maintenance and servicing, capital investment, health and safety compliance, suitability and sufficiency, and also facilities management of the corporate offices. My final slide are key themes and projects currently. So there's an area of work around corporate landlord function, understanding of assets performance. I've spoken about that, so I don't think I need to go into any more detail. Asset devolution, we'll be talking about that later in the meeting. So again, I don't think there's any need to dwell on that now. Commercialization, which is around getting the most out of each and every asset, both financially and non-financially. Investing in existing or new assets where there's a strong business case. Big theme around placemaking, particularly as we progress through the recovery stages from COVID. Investment in existing buildings and moving from reactive to more planned works. I've touched on that. And finally, but of huge importance and where we can make a real difference, in terms of direct impact is around climate change and assuming and managing our assets in a way that we support and that we support the council's wider priorities around climate change. So that is the end of my presentation. Hopefully that, along with the Teams updates and the Property Matters newsletter, gives you sort of a good introduction as to who we are, what we do, and what asset management is all about. And I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any. I'm just going to stop presenting if that's okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim, for that. Could I possibly ask, just before I open up the floor to non-members who may wish to ask questions, on that final slide, would you be able to, the next time we see it, move climate change to the top of that list? Only because obviously it's something this administration, and I'm sure this council, appreciates is probably the greatest threat to all our existence. So all the other things on that list will cease to be relevant when we're up to our necks in seawater. So if you could put that there, that'd be great. And then we can always consider anything we do with the climate change at the top of that list. Thank you. May I invite non-members of the committee to ask any questions of Tim, if they so wish, and then I'll go to within the forum members. I'm looking here. I have Nick Hookway. Over to you, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Hope you can see me and hear me okay. Yes, I'm just sort of listening in and heard Tim mention about the Mamhead Slipway at Exmouth and also the realignment. Now, though Mamhead Slipway is not in my ward, it's adjoining. And I'm not clear in my own mind how Mamhead Slipway is an asset that generates income. And I understood at one time that it might have been linked in with the water sports kick, but I would just like some clarity on that. So at the moment, the use of the slipway appears to be completely free. So in what way is that generating income? That's all I'm really would like to ask. Thank you.
Are you happy to come back in on that, Tim?
Yes, I'm probably going to bring a colleague of mine, Alison Hayward, into that particular item as well. But just to add some context, the reference to Mamhead Slipway was in respect of projects that what is now our Place and Prosperity team have been involved in and have delivered over time, not necessarily linked to generating an income. A lot of the work that we do as a service isn't just about generating an income, but Mamhead Slipway was long before my time. So, Alison, are you able to come in on that point, please, if possible?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Tim. Yes, just to clarify on that, it's as Tim said, it was simply listed in that list of projects that Tim was referring to that the Place and Prosperity team had been involved in over the years. So, in fact, that project was ongoing when I joined the council, and it was dealt with as part of the Exmouth regeneration master plan. It was one of the projects identified within that, so it came within the scope of the work within my team. So not an income generating asset, but just dealt with by us. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Nick, for that. May I ask Peter Faithful, Councillor Faithful, would you like to speak?
I'm just wondering about beach huts. Are they individual properties, or is that how do beach huts fit as assets?
So to respond to that, beach huts, the data For the individual, so we have some beach huts that we let out to businesses to run as lengths of beach huts. Then as a separate model, we have other sites where we as a council let individual beach huts. Where we let individual beach huts, that's generally picked up through street scene in terms of the individual lettings. However, we are responsible for the maintenance of those beach huts. And I think that's just an example of where that particular team, so the Place and Prosperity team, can add real value in terms of using the data that we've got to look at how we can proactively manage those sites, because beach huts don't last forever. We've actually spent quite a lot of money on our beach huts in recent years, particularly the ones on Exmouth seafront, because of where they are exposed to the elements. So it's around coming up with a model that works moving forward, but also in a way that really contributes towards placemaking, because we've got great coastal locations, and the beach huts are something that really sort of drive that sort of sense of belonging, sense of place, vitality in a location. But there might be opportunities to look at more beach huts, different types of beach huts. So that's all around that, but linking it into the investment data we have, what we need to invest, and then also linking it into how we can contribute towards placemaking.
Is that okay, Councillor Faithful?
I think, but are you saying that one group of huts is one asset and other individual huts can also be single assets? Going back to your 400 and whatever properties. I don't know, how do the numbers work on that?
I might be wrong. My understanding is typically a stretch of beach huts would be shown as one parent asset, but then we have child assets as well linked to them. But again, a lot of the beach huts are the day-to-day administration of them are dealt with by street scenes. So in terms of how we manage it, it's more of a sort of strategic oversight of it rather than sort of the day-to-day lettings. Rob, my colleague Rob Harrison is listening in. Rob is will probably be able to answer that question definitively if he can just. Robbie, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Rob?
So the beach huts at Exmouth and Sidmouth would be a block, would be a building, if you like. Obviously, the old timber huts at sort of Budley and Seaton, we only let as sites now, or Street Scene only let as sites now, so we don't have all those individual huts anymore in our ownership. So yeah, the individual blocks, if you like, would be a building asset.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Councillor Flowfield. I think just before I go over to Councillor Rowland, I think this comes back to something that Councillor Hookway mentioned in a previous discussion, actually, at the Queen's Drive Delivery Group about East Devon making the most of our natural asset, which is the incredible coastline that we have. And so beach huts certainly are something that we know are incredibly popular with residents and tourists alike. So that's something that perhaps this AMF can consider as we move forwards. Councillor Rowland, Jack, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I did notice, though, very kind of you to invite me to speak as part of the forum, but I did notice that Jeff Pook had his hand raised earlier, but I didn't think he had his blue hand raised. So whether Jeff still wants to speak as somebody from outside the forum, I'm happy to wait until after him.
Jeff?
Thank you, Jack. No, it was just to apologise to Tim for having to miss out. I had to go and answer the door, and I've asked him to send the slides just in case there's something I haven't seen before.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. Good morning, Tim. Thank you very much for your presentation. I found that quite useful, improved my knowledge in certain areas. I had two questions. One, you mentioned that There's now been this work done to project forward for 30 years to evaluate what the costs might be in terms of maintenance work. Does that take into account the carbon neutral targets that East Devon have now set? That's my first question. And the second question is, out of the total number of buildings that we have on the asset register, is it possible to say this morning how many of those are actually empty and deemed as redundant, but have no potential value as being redeveloped as a commercial asset?
Okay. The first question is easy, it's a lot easier to answer. So have we linked those costs to carbon neutral targets? No, because those costs are driven by component replacement. So elements within it will relate to component replacements. You'll identify, well, the windows need to be replaced after 10 years, the roof after 25 years, the walls will need repointing after 30 years, those sorts of costs. We've also taken into account reactive maintenance within those costs. We've also taken into account health and safety compliance and day-to-day management, but it doesn't incorporate what I suppose I would refer to as improvement in those assets. But really it's the money we need to spend to continue those buildings operating as they currently are, but using that data, that should then inform the strategy around those properties that make sense to hold on to and continue doing what we're currently doing. Those that perhaps we should look at repurposing, so changing the use. Those that perhaps might be suitable for asset transfer. And using all of that, then making, so within one of my earlier slides, I talked about a investment protocol, and that investment protocol should be actually about what we want to do over and above. And I would see that climate change as being absolutely a key priority of the council. But it's what are we doing to improve a property rather than just what are we doing as bog standard to keep that property watertight. So long answer, Jack, but to summarise it, the answer is no. It doesn't include those figures. Your second question around empty and redundant properties. I don't have a number to mind, but and Rob Harrison might want to come in at this point, but in terms of redundant properties, I don't think we have any. If we do, it's a very small number. In terms of empty properties, if they're empty, there will be a plan as to what we do with it. For example, the Moradunum at Seaton, so that being sort of a classic example, it's empty, but it's being held as empty before we dispose of it because of a wider discussion. So, Rob, are you able to come in just to give us a flavour on whether, on what the numbers are, if we know those numbers, but they will be very, very low.
Yeah, so I think we've got basically sort of 5 sort of empty properties at the moment. Obviously, one of them is the Moradunum, which there is a plan for. The others are things which we're marketing or just about to market, if that makes sense. So we've got like an industrial unit at Axminster ready to market now. We've got a couple of other buildings, the Warrenview Sports Ground, the former Sibby United Clubhouse, which is basically the lease is almost complete on that one now. So there's not anything that we've got which is declared surplus as yet. So I know that there are other authorities who potentially have quite a significant number of surplus properties, if you like. We don't have stuff that's just sat there empty and surplus and sort of rotting away, if you like. So things that are void we're probably trying to relet. So like the workshops, you get a little bit of turnover every once in a while. So those things will be in the process of being marketed. And then you've got things like the Moradunum, which like you've already touched on. There is a plan proceeding with that one.
So thank you, Rob. So Councillor Rowland, what I would like us to get to before too long is having that financial asset data. I would like to sit down with members and actually look at, well, what does that mean in terms of how we manage those assets? So it's financial, but it's also non-financial. So, and I'm very mindful of that. We don't hold our assets to make money. In fact, the vast majority of our assets will cost significantly more to maintain than they ever will in terms of generating an income. But it's a very good reason for that, because they're providing a social, economic, or environmental benefit to the community. But historically, without the data, and this is something that Councillor Pook previously and I spent a lot of time on getting this data together, and it involved doing stock condition surveys of all of our premises and then financial data against all those premises. It's been a huge piece of work that's been going on and we're probably, I'd say, about 97, 98% there now, and it's taken probably the best part of 2 years to get to. But now that we've got there, we, within our asset strategy moving forward, need to go through a list of all of our assets and start grouping them together around, these are the assets that are performing well, these are the assets that are not performing so well. Of these assets that are not performing so well, are there things we can do differently? And likewise, when we go through that list, we can then look at climate change. And it might be that actually that particular property is performing well. We know because it's performing well, we will be keeping that property. And therefore, that's the property to invest in terms of PV cells or similar in terms of climate change, rather than potentially investing in climate change initiatives on a building that we then choose to sell in a couple of years' time, and then it gets bulldozed and houses built on, or whatever. So, and I think in terms of our portfolio generally, that's where we are at the moment. So we've got the data now to inform the decision making, but it's about being proactive, and particularly in terms of your portfolio, Councillor Rowland, understanding, and I've already shared a lot of the information with Simon Davey, but it's around sort of understanding, well, actually, if we do nothing, this is how much we're going to need to spend moving forward and what the implications of that are.
Thanks, Tim. It was very good to hear that. I totally agree that without that full information, it's impossible to make sound judgments and decisions. You mentioned the asset register is 97, 98% complete. How much more work is there to do then to make it 100% complete?
Okay. So, Councillor Redden, that's not the asset register, that's the stock condition data and the investment data. So the asset register is 100% complete in terms of all of our assets on there. There's always more data we can collect against those assets, which we're doing all the time. We've got a piece of work that's finishing this side of Christmas. I suspect that will have all of our assets other than probably Blackdown House, Exmouth Town Hall, and I can't remember the third. I think there was a third property. It might have been one of the depots that might not be included by then, but we are pretty much there. Certainly with Blackdown House, we're not expecting to need to spend huge amounts of money in terms of component replacement for some time anyway. So yeah, we're pretty much there. So we can start sharing that. It might be, I don't know, if Simon and you would like, then I can bring that to one of your finance meetings initially for you to sort of start looking at what that data is telling us.
Is that okay, Jack? Lovely. Okay, so next I have Councillor Pratt. Would you mind if I just bring in Councillor Pook as a non-member of the forum before you? Councillor Pook, over to you.
Okay, thank you for letting me come in there. Just following up from what Tim was saying there, have we got any idea of a programme, which is something I've always been trying to do, where we're going to, once we know what our assets are and we know the condition surveys, and we now have, and I'm not sure where we are now at the moment on the careful choices, where we're going to sit down as councillors or within the asset management forum, going through and doing this, looking at them and dividing them up into those to transfer, those to keep, which is to do the statutory services, those which might be suitable for transfer to villages and towns, and those which would be a straightforward disposal because there's no logical use for them. Do we have any sort of timetable for when we're going to start doing that yet?
Tim, if I can come back on that. Thank you, Councillor Pook, for that. You've actually sort of nipped into what I was going to cover under the asset transfer policy section. I think it's evident to everyone that the fact that we've had an asset management forum 10 months after the last one is pretty indicative of why everything's been delayed. And if I may, I'd like to cover your point under the item 9, if that's okay, because I think that's pertinent to the CAT. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Pratt, over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you. Tim, I enjoyed listening to your presentation, particularly in regard to the asset register. You quite rightly attach importance to the asset register, and from time to time I've been in touch with you requesting information, and it's been difficult to get things from the register. For example, recently Paul Hayward asked for the register involving the Sidmouth properties. And while we now have a list of the names of the properties concerned, we have no other information on that part of the register. And I'm sure you'll recognise from time to time members of the forum will request the register details and this is something which is needed because we have to make decisions on various properties with the advice of officers. So looking at that register now, and you've gleaned over it with the answers to Jack. What do you think the situation now is with that register? If I asked you today for a full detailed register of assets with all the financial implications involving those assets, would you be able to supply that to me?
Short answer is no. If you ask for information that's currently held within uniform, then I can produce that within a day. If you request information that, and I share many of your concerns, if you request information that comes from different systems where we need to pull data together, then it's extremely difficult. And that I referenced within my presentation. Actually, I said, well, uniform is not a corporate system as such. So here, and the example that you've included at Sidmouth, frustrating for you as members, also extremely frustrating for us as officers. We had some finance information pulled through into that report, which I looked at, and there were blanks where there shouldn't have been blanks. So we have a meeting arranged with finance, which has had to be rearranged a couple of times, but it's now taking place within the next week. To bottom out exactly how we can have up-to-date information, so we can merge it with our system. And from my perspective, up-to-date information, but information relating to all cost centres. So what I would like, and I'm sure this is what you'd like as well, is not only maintenance cost data, but all of the costs relating to that particular asset, whether it be utilities, insurance, maintenance, service recharges, everything that goes against that. So yeah, if we need to talk with other systems at the moment, that is a big issue. But hopefully we'll be closer to an answer after the meeting with finance in the next week, and I can update both you and Councillor Hayward following that meeting. So obviously it relates to a request you've made.
Do you agree, though, with what Paul Hayward has said, particularly if we're going to be dealing with community asset transfers, that it's essential that we have this information before us when making decisions?
Yes, for you as members and for us as officers.
Yes.
And the information is there, and the information is there, but it's in so many different data sets, and it's about pulling it together, which should be easy, but so far has proven difficult. But maybe there'll be a breakthrough in that meeting. But yeah, agree completely, as officers and as members, to make that decision, those decisions, you need to have all of the data against those assets.
Yes. One final question, Tim, an easy one for you. You've obviously got, as a department, considerable amount of work involved here. How many staff does the department hold?
I should know, just bear with me, I should know it's about 16, 17, 18. Let me just go back to the relevant slide. So it's 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 18. So 18 staff. And they're set out within one of my earlier slides. It's also set out actually on the back of the Property Matters newsletter that I've issued to members. Yes. We are as a service struggling in terms of resources. Probably it's fair to say in all three of the teams. So I've already had discussions with Mark Williams and Simon Davey around particular areas where I need additional resource. So that's sort of going through along the normal routes. So for me, around resource, there's I suppose a pinch point really around a day-to-day management of the portfolio versus B, being able to be proactive. And without that resource, we struggle to be as proactive as we'd like. And in terms of being proactive, it's around for example, asset transfers. It's around also, and this is probably more important now than I would suggest to say ever really, which is around how we can use our assets, but also our placemaking interventions in terms of supporting the wider recovery from COVID. So where in the past we've had sites that we've been looking to deliver, now is the time more than ever to have that resource in place to deliver on those sites. So hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, we are extremely tight.
Yes, Tim, the figure of 18, does that include support staff?
Yes, yeah, it includes all of our staff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Just before I bring in Councillor Arnott, I think it's fair to just remind members and members of the forum and councillors. So we are an hour into the meeting, and we still have got an awful lot of business to attend to. And whilst I have cleared my morning, I appreciate not all members here have, and will have other things to do. So again, it's important. We haven't had an AMF for 10 months, so there are a lot of questions to be asked, and I imagine the next few items will be even more intensive. So yes, thank you. If members can just be aware of that. So I'm going to bring in, if I may now, Leader of Council, Councillor Paul Arnott. But Councillor Ledger, just your hand is going up and down and up and down. Do you want to speak after Paul?
Taking it down in light of what you just said.
Please don't be discouraged. If you need to ask a question, you must ask a question. Councillor Arnott, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I will be very brief. Yes, picking up on what Councillor Pratt has just said, I suppose the question through you, Chair, really for Tim or Simon, and eventually for the CEO, is what, as leader of the council, do I have to ask the CEO to resource this council so that it can create this open, accessible, definitive asset register, which many councillors, I'm thinking about, colleagues of mine in the East Devon Alliance, were absolutely aware that Councillor Pook was following this through for years as well, can access this information. This is a parallel issue, as we know, with the matters of information around Section 106 agreements relating to local communities as well. And although I quite understand why we haven't managed to make significant progress with this in recent months, understandably, I do think this must change. And the question is how we do it. How many more employees do we need to do this? And thank you to Tim. It was fascinating to be reminded quite how many assets we are responsible for, or we own, those which we can make revenue from, those which are in effect an ongoing liability. But it's becoming increasingly incredible that there isn't just a front sheet that can lead us all to a clear understanding of what our assets are and any issues associated with them, even if it's just kind of, land registry entries or any covenants that apply to them or any particular debts that apply to them. So I suppose it's not a question that I think can be answered today, Chair, but I do think we've got to move on this. And so I'm not throwing a curveball at Tim. I know he can't answer it on the spot, or Simon, but I just wanted to have that said. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I share your sentiments exactly, and I do empathise with Tim and with Simon. Everything's about resource. If we were not in a COVID era, we would convene a meeting with officers and councillors at Blackdown House. We would sit in one of the ante rooms and we would ask questions, and every officer who has access to a piece of the puzzle, be it finance or wherever, the pieces that Tim alluded to, would be present with their laptop. So when we went, consider asset Z, we could, from the uniform system, we would know about it. Simon could then pull up the financial data, legal could pull up their data, and each officer would add their bit in to that conversation. But as you say, that's a very onerous process to get the outcome for one particular asset. And yes, I think the corporate system that Tim's alluding to is the holy grail for us, because it will make the job we're trying to do a whole lot easier. It will certainly make Tim's job easier. It will make Simon's job easier, make the estate's job easier. So I think that's a very valid point, Councillor Arnott. What do we need to resource it, to enable it, to get, is it a CRM system? I'm not an IT person, but an all-encompassing system that self-populates those fields. So when we ask about asset X, it's available. And then we can have access to members. So when members are asked a question by their local communities about asset X, they can answer. Or it's available to Tim at the blink of an eye and he can respond. So thank you very much for that. I can't see any other blue hands on this subject. So may I, Tim, just thank you for your presentation and for the work you put into it. It was very, very interesting. And now, with no further issues on this, move on to agenda item 8, service planning, which brings us back to Mr. Child. Back to you, sir.
It brings you back to me, but hopefully this item will be very, very brief. So currently we're in the process of service planning, and with today's AMF taking place and the fact that it's an AMF we've not met since the very beginning of the year, I just wanted to share our direction of travel and seek support, I suppose, from members to the themes that I've set out within this very brief report. So I've grouped, so this isn't any attempt whatsoever to capture everything we do. This is just very, very high level, very topical themes. So under place and environment, you'll be pleased that it's top of the list in this document. Climate change, which is where it should be, top of the list. So climate change, making land and building assets more sustainable and fulfilling commitments to climate change strategy. In place and environment, I've also referenced Queen's Drive. Clearly that's a significant project. I've also referenced exploring opportunities afforded by existing assets to invest in smaller, locally based projects where there's a catalytic effect on placemaking. So it's basically looking at our assets more strategically and looking at how we can do things slightly different with them to have that catalytic effect. Around economy, it's around using our existing assets and potentially commercial investment to capitalise on opportunities to support COVID economic response and recovery, particularly where there's that catalytic effect, as I've said, and also to support existing tenants through the response and recovery from COVID. So I think that's really, really important. I've talked about the number of tenancies we have, and we have a key role there in supporting those tenants. Under the theme of homes and communities, it's enhanced support to the HRA to deliver acquisitions. So these are specifically acquisitions using right to buy receipts, but also possibly development and other opportunities to increase social and affordable housing. And then finally, on council and council services, the first theme is around centralising of asset data to understand performance of all assets. So we've talked lots about that. It's also around COVID compliance of council assets, so making sure our assets are COVID secure and continue to be so. Continuing commercialisation of a let portfolio, moving away from reactive to more programmed works and investment. Commercialisation, investing in existing or new assets where there's a strong business case, and obviously subject to what comes out in the later agenda item, asset devolution. So that's in no way a reflection of what will be in our complete service plan, but that is in my and my team leaders' views are the key themes. So I think a lot of that we've spoken about in the earlier item. I suppose, is there anything that I am desperately missing that stands out to others that maybe didn't stand out to us? If so, please let me know. And the recommendation from this report, I'm asking that AMF consider and support the themes below to inform service planning for 21/22.
Thank you very much, Tim. Do any non-members of the forum wish to contribute to that or add things to the service plan? No, that looks like a no. Members of forum, over to you. Would you like to add or remove anything from that, or would you simply wish to make the recommendation as put forward? Not getting a flow of activity. So, well, on that basis, Councillor Arnott, over to you.
If you were about to propose from the chair, I would be happy to second, or I can propose. Whichever. If you wish to propose that recommendation, I'd be happy to second. Or I'm happy to propose that, Chair. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Well, in order to keep things ticking along, I'll second that. So, for the interests of probity, can we just ask for members of the forum to raise or put a green tick if you support that, or a red cross if you are against?
For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is underway. And you have 4 votes, Chair, for the motion.
Thank you very
Chair,
much.
can I just explain why I didn't vote? Because I had to leave the meeting to make a phone call. I didn't hear that debate, so I don't think it was fair for me to vote. So
Thank you
just to
very much.
clarify.
Note your abstention, Councillor Councillor
Thank
Rowan.
you.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on now to item 9, community asset transfer policy. So this is a very, very important issue. And primarily, can I start really by giving my sincere thanks to Councillor Pook, who's with us today, as the former chair of the AMF, for all of the work that he and the previous members of the AMF and officers put together to get us to this place where we have a community asset transfer policy to consider. Now, of course, members will be aware that there has been some history with this. And again, I'll ask Tim to give us a little bit of background and a précis on this. So in fact, well, I'll shut up now, actually, and I'll go straight to Tim because you've put a report together for us. So I'll say no more and come to you, Tim, and then we can discuss it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, a draft community asset transfer policy and procedure was prepared. It was considered by AMF back in September 2019 with a recommendation to Cabinet to endorse it. It was a draft policy and procedure so that it could then go out to consultation to the towns and parishes, following the consultation, then come back to AMF, make any tweaks, amendments if needed, and then back to Cabinet for final adoption. That was in autumn 2019. We were then in a position very quickly whereby we had the Careful Choices consultation, and a decision was made with our portfolio holder, but also by SMT, that it wasn't wise to consult on this at the same time as Careful Choices, on the basis that this almost should have followed on from Careful Choices, in that Careful Choices would have set out what our residents saw as important, perhaps as less important, perhaps opportunities to transfer assets or services. And what this policy and procedure did was provided, I suppose, a tool to make that happen. So therefore, the tool to deliver it should follow after the bigger consultation. Of course, that then fed into beginning of COVID. We also then had a new political leadership. We also, as we've said earlier, haven't had an AMF since January. So I wanted to bring this back to AMF today to discuss next steps. So as an outcome from this meeting, it could well be that, yeah, AMF are still supportive, things haven't changed, and we'll go out to consultation on the current draft. Alternatively, AMF now may, particularly in light of where we are as an authority and where we are with COVID, and how so many things are different, how we might want to look at it again before we go out to consultation. So really, the reason for bringing it here today is to get that, to get a steer as to next steps, please.
Thank you, Tim. Just before I invite non-members of the forum to participate on this, can I just ask a couple of questions of you, Tim? So, looking at the community asset transfer draft that was considered back in September, with that there were a couple of ancillary documents. There was the actual expression of interest form, and there was a timeline, a draft timeline flow chart within there. In terms of the expression of interest, so the consultation proposal within the report you've given us today is that after careful choices, we would consult with town and parish councils in terms of our policy. But on the expression of interest form, it relates to transfer of assets owned by East Devon District Council to community group, which will obviously include town and parish council. So my question, I suppose, is, was the intention, and perhaps Councillor Pook might want to come back in as the previous chair of this forum, was the intention to consult with just parish and town councils or with community groups as well? Because that broadens the scope of the consultation, but it also increases the time it takes. Councillor Pook, will you better shed some light on that, what your thought process was?
Yeah, the process, as far as I could see, was always quite straightforward. First of all, gather all the information. And then once we gathered all the information, we as a council could identify what was essential to us to provide our services, and then we knew where we could go out the communities. In between that, then we had the careful choices, which hadn't really been on the radar, but then came in towards the middle of last year, and that gave us another set of information. So when we're making the decision on what is viable for transfer, we would have it backed up by what the communities were what the general consensus was within the community. So the next stage, as far as I can see it, as I saw it, was we as a council identify what is actually essential to the council, because there's no point sort of saying to the community, what assets do you want, and then find that some of those assets they can't have because they're necessary for the delivery of our council plan and our statutory duties. But having got the information on the assets and had the sort of the broad brush feedback through careful choices of what the general consensus was within the community, then to actually break down the assets geographically. And I know there's been a big argument as geographically or service lead, but I think if we're talking about communities, it's got to be geographically. With services, sort of informing that, but then to be able to go to the individual parishes and towns, almost on a roadshow basis of the asset management forum leaders, like yourself in this case, and the property and services professional team from the officers, and ask for, if they're interested, ask for an invite to the meeting, so we can actually explain to that parish or that town what assets we're talking about and the potential for delivering them, but also the potential for what happens if they aren't put up for transfer. So everyone's got a very clear idea of what's available, what they can have if they want it. If they don't want it, what will happen, and the financial and actual implications of it. And so then the towns and parishes can make their decisions. I think it's got to be town and parishes. The towns and parishes can then bring in their local community groups, and they could be in those meetings. But I think if we set out to try and approach, say we're going to talk to all the towns and parishes and the community groups, so it's giving ourselves an unnecessary job. First of all, we'll certainly be missing out people who wouldn't be known to us. And that's the whole point of a tiered system, going from the central government right down to district government, down to parish council government. The parishes and towns know the actual groups within there which might be interested, because not all assets can be suitable for going to a town and parish. Some might be much more suitable going to a local community group. But then then the community asset policy and the process can start taking control, and they can make their applications and show why they want it, show they got the ability to take it over and all that. Because amongst all this, we're trying to do two things. One is give the towns and parishes the ability to look after assets and make better benefit and take better local benefit for them, but also to slim down the vast majority of the assets which asset management or the district council holds, which is not necessary to hold, because some of those assets we're going down to benches and signposts to car parks. They're all different. They've got different different demands and different status in it. So is it right that Tim has to eventually be responsible for a bench in the middle of a park somewhere? You know, he should be concentrating on the larger assets, the things which people look at in the community day by day, the grass triangle here, the park here, the benches, the small community buildings. They should be in the community, and they are ripe for transfer. But as long as they continue to provide the public service which that community feels they should provide, or what we feel as a council should be provided in that area. So going just to summarise that, the process as far as I can see it is we've got the data, 97%, so a little bit more to go. We've got the data to analyse things. We'll have the data back from Careful Choices, which sets the tone within the district. We then have a meeting of the Asset Forum, which can then, with other councillors joining in, which can then start looking at the division of assets per geographic area. And then you start taking the geographic areas out to the towns and parishes, who then can incorporate communities if they want to. To me, it seemed a fairly straightforward process, but then most processes seem straightforward to me until I start getting involved in the council. End of lecture.
Thank you, Councillor Pook. I think, yeah, just before I bring in Councillor Pratt and Councillor Arnott, from my own perspective, yes, on paper, this should be a fairly simplistic exercise. You know, localism 2011 was all about giving power to local communities, and a great many parish and town councils believe that they can run assets just as well as the district council. They are closer to their residents than we are. And as you alluded to, you know, if you tear out our assets, is it right that the district council, which has so many duties, it has so many responsibilities, even more so now, needs to concern itself with benches and with dog bins and waste bins? So that's the minutiae of this process. And I'd like to, by using this AMF, tease out of our asset lists the things that can, with some quick wins, we could establish a policy and just perhaps, and this isn't saying it's going to happen, but we could consult with parish and town councils and say those small street furniture assets, they're all yours now. Simple as that. You take care of them, you maintain them, you look after them. It's down to you. That's obviously just a, not a gospel, that's a suggestion. But in terms of the wider thing, I think this is where there's a dichotomy, because what we as a district council might believe is something we want to keep. I know from correspondence received that a lot of town councils believe they would like it. And therein lies the challenge, is how we provide amenity and provide service to those local communities who believe they can run the asset better. Now, of course, some of them will carry a cost. For those that are, a patch of grass, is it in our interest to keep it? Perhaps not. But a car park earns interest, earns revenue for the district council. But if the sum can be capitalised and an agreement reached, it might well be that the town council believes it can put it to better use. There's the issue of financing. Well, we as a council, we hold the asset. Perhaps going forwards, and these are, I'm just throwing these out there as discussion items, that if a parish and town council would ordinarily have to go to the PWLB to acquire a sum of money if they don't have it in reserve, perhaps this council can act as that lender. It's a thought, with caveats as the PWB put on, that it has to be maintained, it has to be looked after. These are just thoughts, but I take your point entirely, Councillor Pook. On paper, it should be very easy, but I think what Mr. Child has referred to is that list, which we know the physical asset, we know where it is, but the actual monetary issues to it come from a different source. But what I don't want is to, thank you, Tim, is to delay this inordinately, because the parish and town councils, I can assure you, are chomping at the bit to move forward on this. And if it's going to have to wait, as Councillor Arnott alluded to earlier, to get an integrated system, that's not going to be quick enough. So there is a compromise that I think we have to find on this. And I think discussion of the CAT will be important today. So just before I bring in those who wish to speak, Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I just wanted to bring members back to, I suppose, the purpose of the agenda item. we've moved the discussion over the last 10 minutes or so more on to discussions with parishes and towns around which assets are in and which assets are out. The procedure and policy that we are hopefully going to come to a conclusion today on whether it needs further work or whether it can go out to consultation merely sets out the procedure and an approach that the council would take and gives some clarity to parishes and towns. If we were to go out to consultation on that, or a revision of it, it's about the procedure. It's not about saying to a particular parish or town, these are your assets, these are the assets in your patch. Which ones would you like? Or these are the ones that we might consider transferring to you. It's not about that. No. This is about the approach and procedure. That we agreed at a previous AMF would need to go out to consultation. Picking up on Councillor Pook's thoughts, yeah, my understanding certainly was it was parishes and towns only, but being really, really clear on that consultation, that it's not about picking out individual assets. What I wouldn't want is for individual councils to respond to the consultation based primarily on this is what we want out of this. This is our approach. I don't know, do you think the timescales are appropriate? Do you think our expectations on you to provide X, Y, Z are fair and reasonable? It's those sorts of issues. Now, whilst we go out to consultation, if we're indeed going to go to consultation, then alongside that, we as officers and AMF members and other members can give some thought as to, across the district, which assets are in and which assets are out, picking up on the financial data we now have for the 97% plus, but also our other thoughts around direction of travel, around community benefit. And almost you can run those two things side by side, because otherwise there's a real risk that this just takes an inordinate amount of time, that actually when you get to having that list of assets and going out and speaking to the parishes and towns about specific opportunities, actually your policy and procedure is already sort of outdated. So I'd almost sort of suggest that there's two strands to this, but I suppose the key purpose of bringing this to AMF today is to make sure that AMF members still believe the draft procedure and policy achieve what you want to achieve. If not, let's look at making the necessary amendments, taking it back to Cabinet, but doing it before we go out to consultation, because once we've gone out to consultation, it's going to be that much more difficult to then change it.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for that clarity. Just before I bring in now I've got Councillor Armstrong next, but just before I come to that, so yeah, I suppose taking on board what you just said, Tim, if I look at Appendix B, the procedure for progression of an application for CAT, I would, I suppose it's for this forum to decide, is 10 months from the submission of interest to a point where there's no agreement to proceed realistic? Personally, I think that's too long. 4 months to consider an expression of interest and then decide either to invite them to submit or a proposal, not to progress. Personally, being I like to be proactive, I'd like that to be 4 weeks. To say to a council, after 4 months, we still haven't made our mind up, I'm sorry, that's where we get criticised as a council. Councils across the country get criticised for the inordinate length of time it takes to get to a decision. Then the stage 2, decision within 6 months. I appreciate that that's a bit more meaty. There's some, some discussions, some legal work, but even so, we're not talking about buying vast swathes of the countryside. We could be talking about acquiring a piece of green land or a play park or a car park. So I personally, and I'll be very interested to hear what the forum says, would like to look at the timing of that, certainly before we go out to consultation, and make sure it's realistic, make sure it doesn't put unnecessary burdens on officers and members and portfolio holders who have to consider it, but also give some degree of inspiration to councils that they're going to get an answer in a timely fashion, and they're not going to have 4 ordinary meetings of the council roll round and the clerk's still being asked, well, I haven't heard anything. And I say that as a clerk, so, you know, I wear two hats here. So that's just my penneth worth on that. Can I bring in, I have a long list of speakers on this, but can I bring in Councillor Armstrong, first of all, please?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, it's nothing to do with this immediate agenda item. I have to go off to another meeting now. I was going to speak on the item right at the end, the Marple workshops, but I've written to Tim, so he's aware of what I think about that. And
okay,
hopefully he'll raise that in the discussion. So I'm sorry, I can't wait to actually
no
speak.
No problem at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Coming back to the speaker list, Councillor Pook, your hand's still up. Do you wish to add anything more to what you've said already?
Yeah, just very briefly, that and Tim and I discussed this quite often before, and it went down as a community asset transfer policy, and I always felt that we would be a bit more of the document as it stood as more of a process as a policy, I see it's still a policy. So I think this document is a process which will allow it to happen, but the policy is something which is slightly different, which is more to do with the council assessing and working out what we need to keep. So that's, I just want to say that before.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I have no more speakers from outside of the forum, so thank you for those who participated. Can I now bring it back within the forum members? Councillor Pratt, if you would.
Yes, thank you, Paul. In the document which refers to the transfer procedure, there's a clause 7.3 which states, if the district council requires, this process can be fast tracked. And that's what I'm looking at, because I think, one, we need to get on with this, because as Paul, you've said, there are town councils who are really anxious to proceed with this. In fact, one town council has received a list of assets, and we're waiting to hear back from them. But looking at the whole procedure, I agree with what you've said about the timing. We've got to take into account that the towns and parish councils will have to have their meetings, which shows, depending on the time we send out anything to them, they're going to be, they will want a full meeting and then come back to us. But so we need to look at the timings of this. To have the whole matter completed within 6 months is fair enough. But looking at the matter, I don't think we need to go to consultation, quite honestly. I think we have enough here to proceed without the consultation. It's our policy, and this is how we're going to deal with it. And I don't think there's any need for a consultation to go out to the towns or parishes. And the other point is that the transaction will be with a town council or a parish council, but not a community. Once the transfer has gone through to a town council or a parish council, then in the future they may wish to transfer again to or lease, perhaps more likely they will want to lease to a community group, and that would then go forward on the basis that the district council would be able to give their consent or otherwise to that transaction. So we need to simplify, we need to move quickly, and those are the general points I would like to stress, Paul. I don't think there's anything else to say at this stage, but I'd be interested to hear what other members of the forum say.
Thank you very much indeed. I take on board precisely what you say, and of course, within all this, however, the district council would always want some, I suppose, and it's not control, but some level of reassurance that if it did go down an asset transfer route with a smaller local authority, and that local authority then decided to enter into an agreement with another community group, that the district council could be assured that that asset as it was not lost to the public. Because let's not lose track of what we're talking about here. Everything is about delivering services to the public, and what we don't want is to enter into any agreements and then the asset be lost through some legal shenanigans somewhere down the line.
Yeah, there would have to be restrictive covenants in that document on the deed transferring.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Arnott, to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to express my gratitude to Councillor Pratt there for what he said. That reflects many of my own concerns with this as well. So in general, I take a positive view of this. As, like you, Chair, a devoted localist, and also as a serving parish councillor, as I've been on and off for 13 years, I think it is. But we have to be careful here as well. The kind of application I would like to see come forward from a community to take on an asset from the district needs to come proactively from the parish or town council. I think we need to be very careful that no part of this process looks like we're putting a whole load of stuff up for auction. Help yourself, girls and boys. This needs to be something I believe that a town or parish council is perhaps already considering, or that they've often talked about in one of their meetings. If only we had control of this. I'm also minded that obviously Councillor Pooks is an exemplary example in beer, and I hope he'll take this as a compliment, that there aren't that many Councillor Pooks to the pound. You have to be very careful with parish and town councils. They are run to differing levels of ability. Some of them haven't had elections for many years as well. And you have to be cautious about how much, just because it's a parish or town council, it necessarily, if it hasn't been recently properly elected, reflects the will of the local people. I think Councillor Pratt is right to point out that there are real risks of ownership drift on this if it then gets allocated onto a community group, a local charity. What are the governance arrangements of that? I think the other risk is on scale. There's a difference, isn't there, between a triangle of grass that everybody's always wanted to keep mown and can't understand why nobody's doing it, and a car park with massive responsibilities for ongoing tarmacking and potential income there as well. Now, I know there may be arrangements we put in place to help ease the handover, but we have to consider really carefully whether that is wise or not across the whole district. So the standard, I think the other thing we need to bear in mind is that, which many of us will hear in parish and town council meetings, it's not always clear what's owned by county and what's owned by district, by the public and by parish and town. And that's complicated as well. And we'll need to unravel that. I think if a parish or town did express an interest, I'm very mindful of how much time Tim and his team have got. And it is a finite resource. And possibly an idea would just be to go down, have a meeting with the clerk and a few others, and just look at all what look like publicly owned sites that aren't owned by the parish and town and talk it through. But finally, what I'd say, Chair, is this. I think the gold standard has to be not us going out to all parish and town councils saying, what do you fancy? But the parish and town councils coming to us. And I'm aware that some have. Sidmouth, as we know, for example, recently has. It's very front foot on that. But we have to be mindful that a lot of parish and town councils simply can't do this with the best will in the world. They haven't necessarily got the means. They haven't necessarily even got a full complement of councillors at the moment. So with those caveats and unusual negative comments for me, I support the general direction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnott. Can I bring in Councillor Ledger, please?
Thank you, Chair. I won't cover off, a lot of it's already been said by the other two speakers, so I won't be repeating old ground. I think if we're looking at the procedure, all I'd like to see change is under 3.3, It just altered to basically the statement of intent in the emerging council plan, it to reflect that rather than the previous administrations. But other than that, I quite like the procedure.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure that can be done readily. And I can see Tim writing down and nodding, so that's great. Councillor Rowland, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I agree about the timescales that have been shown in the procedure in terms of the 4 months and 6 months as to whether that could be telescoped down. And I say that from a previous experience I had before I became a district councillor, when I was still a town councillor, because I did submit an expression of interest to do an asset transfer in Seaton. And after a good few months of waiting for a decision, eventually it came back to say, sorry, we can't consider this now because it's now been caught up by what's happening with the beer pilot, which put everybody's applications on hold at that time because that was going to be setting the benchmark for the future. So I think there is already a groundswell over the last good few years of interest being built up from parish and town councils for taking over assets. So I'd fully expect that if we went live with this, there would be an immediate reaction from parish and town councils from that already built up expressions of interest from over the previous years. I totally agree as well that on the other side of the fence, we do need to take into account as well just the economies of scale on the service provision, because if too much is actually devolved down, that obviously has an impact for our service deliveries in certain areas. So I think that's another side of the coin that needs to be taken into account on this. But I'm in favour of the process. I would just like to see the timescales telescoped down, provided that doesn't throw an enormous additional workload into Tim's area in a shorter space of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. Just before I bring you in, Tim, I think it's only fair to say, and this is sort of backtracking on what I said earlier, in that there is a magic word within that says there within 4 months. And so just like the fantastic sale offers in the high street up to 100% off, and then you actually get there and find out it's 2% off. So there probably would be decisions on a small piece of, a triangle of land much quicker than 4 months, whereas a complicated agreement over a car park or a building and an amenity might take longer. So I think that's fair of me to say within this document, taking aboard what all the previous speakers have said. Tim, you want to come back in?
Thank you. Bearing in mind it was probably 2 years ago that I was preparing this document, I've been trying to rack my brains as to why I included 4 months. It was to coincide with AMF. So AMF every 3 months. So we wanted to provide time, because it technically an application could come in the day after an AMF meeting, and then it would be another 3 months until the next AMF meeting, and then time for officers to then go back with the outcome. So that was why it was 4 months. So on the basis that it still, and I think it is right that it comes to AMF to consider that very first step. That is only the first step. It's not decision making, it's to consider that first step to then inform the portfolio holder in terms of whether it proceeds to the next step or not. I think we would have to stick to the 4 months. Clearly, if an application comes in a month before the next AMF and we can get all the documentation ready, then it can be much quicker. But that's why it was such a long time period.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Tim. I understand that. Obviously, it's not my place to commit anyone on this forum to attend more meetings, and of course there's an officer demand and a DSO demand, but I know this is something that is very popular and is keen to be used in the wider parish and town council area. So it might well be perhaps that if we start getting more demand, or the demand completely overwhelms us, that AMF might have to meet a little bit more often. But that's an issue I'll have to discuss with Tim and DSO and Henry as to whether that's achievable, and obviously also with the members of the forum as to whether they're available. I know that they're all very busy doing other things. We're all flat out at the moment. But thank you, Tim, for that clarity. I have, Councillor Pook, do you want to come back in briefly?
Yeah, thank you for sort of letting me come back in again. Just going back to two things, answering Councillor Pratt's concerns regarding the keeping it in the public interest in the beer pilot, and this is also answering the questions about that. The idea to get a pilot together was so we had a sort of a fairly standard approach. So we weren't having to reinvent the wheel every year, every time, and we weren't favouring the council or favouring the parishes each time. So there is a clause in the beer pilot which says those assets have to be kept in for the benefit of the community, and if they can be reinvested in the community, and they've got to provide the same level or the equivalent levels of services or satisfactory levels of services. Answering Councillor Arnott's questions or points about we've got to be proactive from the there's got to be a proactive interest from the villages and towns. Yes, there's got to be a proactive interest from them, which is why I think we need to go to them with this list and sort of say, look, we've been through this. These are things in your area. We currently look after them. You know, they could be transferred to you. If they aren't transferred to you, then they'll be stay within the control of the parish of the district council. You know, you've already said you don't want them transferred. They aren't of interest to you. Then we're in a position to sort of say, well, is it something which really fulfills our statutory requirements, our council plans? And if there's still some assets which aren't there, then we can look at other disposals and things. So I totally agree. It's got to be a willing and eager parish or town that wants to take them forward. But before we get that stage, we've actually got to say what is viable for them, because yeah, we aren't going to go and give them central car parks and things, because those are vital financial inputs to the council. But there are going to be smaller areas. So I agree with Councillor Arnott. They need to be proactive, but we need to go. We do have at one stage. We do need to go to them, sort of say these are the things which can be viable for transfer. Are you interested, and can you start building a plan around those? We can't just sort of say, are you interested in everything?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pook. I'm going to disagree with you slightly there in terms of, when you say it can't be a car park. I'm afraid I'm not going to attach any such caveats. Everything is up for a discussion, in my personal view, and I'll see what the forum thinks. But it depends. We are in a different world now, and we need to consider all of the options. It's part of commercialization. That ties in with this. Just because we own an asset doesn't mean we have to keep it. But it has to be
capitalising an asset which has got an income of something like, I don't know, £250,000 a year is going to be put it slightly out of the range of most towns and parishes. So we've got to start looking realistically.
Thank you, Councillor Pook, but let's not prejudge. The fact is, if in 10 years there are no cars, a car park is useless, earns nothing, and we'll be stuck with a bit of land. We can't. I don't believe we can guess what's going to happen in the future. But you may disagree, but that's what the forum will consider and make its recommendations. Councillor Parr, you're smiling. Who knows? Maybe if the Conservative government bans the internal combustion engine, we'll all be driving around in spaceships.
But
okay,
Councillor Hayward, you just named me, so may I just say?
Of course, please come back.
If a car park was not full of cars, then clearly it would have a huge value as a piece of land.
Thank you very much, and that's why we have overage agreements. Okay, so moving on. So I suppose from the forum perspective, now obviously I come back to this point. We're in a COVID era. What would be a lot easier for this to progress is if the members of this forum could sit in with Tim and officers in a room in Blackdown House, and as Councillor Pook has alluded to, go through this list, and if need be say, okay, these particular assets are completely off the table. As Councillor Rowland says, if we got rid of them, it would directly affect our service offering in a variety of other ways. There are some that if we decided to divest ourselves of them, would actually mean that our staffing would change. So that's a serious issue, because, you know, we can't just let staff go because we made a policy decision. That's unfair to staff. So there is a whole raft of things to consider. But at the moment, we cannot sit in a room together and discuss this. But it's not the sort of thing that can be done in a Zoom meeting. It's just too complex. There's too many variables, too many factors involved. So I'd welcome from the forum, you know, ideas of how we progress this. Now, if we detach one from the other, as Tim has suggested, and just consider this as a policy or a process, whichever we call it, a question of semantics, do we consider that the draft policy, as in what's in front of us, which has already been approved by Cabinet, so we're not reinventing the wheel. The issue here is, do we do a consultation? And I take Councillor Pook's point, you know, but this is consulting on the policy. Is the policy something that the parish councils and town councils would be happy to work with and find it in tune with their wishes? If not, what further work is needed to be done? So on the basis that we have that magic word within, and Tim has explained why those timescales were put in there, I would like to propose that this policy is taken as it is here, with the timescales in place, and is put to the parish and town councils with a series of direct questions that lead them away from the point that's made. We can do that concurrently, work on that process. That's an issue of logistics and safety and timescale and offer as a resource. But the actual policy is this something that the town councils would be happy to agree to as a policy document? Is it going to find favour with them? That can be done very quickly, simply sent out to the councils. Now, we know, as Councillor Arnott has alluded to, some councils will not respond. Some have no assets or any no, so they won't get a response. So if we allow a reasonable, and I would probably suggest that over the Christmas period is not the time to do a consultation, when most parish councils have probably either wound down or are thinking of other things. So agree as a recommendation today, when we take the consultation forward, hopefully delegate to Tim and I, but in consultation with forum members, perhaps offline, the questions that are going to be asked. Or you may wish to bring that back to the next AMF, but I don't want to delay this inordinately. So we actually get it out there into the public domain and let the parish and town councils look at it and then give their view. If they all come back and say it's a terrible policy, one hopes they won't say that, then AMF will have to revisit it. But at least we've got the ball rolling. We've done what we said we would do to them. And in the time it takes for the consultation document to be considered and the responses received, we can do, as Councillor Pook and others have alluded to, that we start looking at what assets are off the table. You know, that's going to be an issue of you know, personal preference, but we will take a lot of input from officers, because they will have views and details of things I and other members are not aware of. Then there's the mid-tier, let's call them, and then perhaps we look at lower tier. But that perhaps that midpoint is the bit we can focus most energy on, because deciding what happens to dog bin and benches is going to take a lot of time, and it won't actually yield a great saving, I would thought, although there'll be some savings. So can I just ask forum members if you are happy with that sort of recommendation? It's come from the chair. I'd be happy to receive anything else, but really crack on. Allow myself and Tim, in conjunction with yourselves, to draft the questions that focus the minds of the parish and town councils as to whether the policy is fit for purpose and would enable them to do the things they want to do. They would have to go to their own, they'd have to consider it at an extraordinary or an ordinary meeting. So perhaps starting the second week of January for a 6-week period. Is that feasible, Tim, in terms of resourcing at your end? I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but a 6-week period gives you enough time for most councils to have met once and considered this as an agenda item, and then their clerk can feed that back to yourself, and then we can then consider the responses.
I have no issue with the. I think the 6 month time, 6 week time period is right. In terms of starting that middle of January, I'd need to look at resourcing and what we can juggle around. So I wouldn't want to commit to that because just sorting out the logistics of who we need to write to. We'll need to get the format of the covering letter agreed with yourself. As we said, we'll need to get the questions agreed as well. So I would have thought we'd be looking at getting it out during sort of January, February, but I wouldn't want to commit right in the middle of January. So certainly, but before the next AMF, which is on the 9th of March. So I think we could commit to getting it out before then.
Okay. Members of Forum, are you happy with that? I mean, I'm mindful we all work, with our local and parish councils, and we're aware, of what Tim has said earlier about resourcing and what's going on elsewhere. Would you be happy with that? That the consultation goes out for a 6-week period before the next AMF? Councillor Rowland?
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking at Tim's paper where it said in the next step. So just so I'm absolutely clear what we're agreeing to, what I've heard is that we're agreeing that the current draft policy is suitable.
Subject to the slight tweaks within there that Councillor Ledger referred to.
Yes.
On service plan revisions.
And that we're going out to consultation now to the parish and town councils at a date to be agreed in January.
January, February, before the next AMF.
Okay. I just want to be clear in my own mind exactly what we're agreeing. So I just trying to paraphrase down what you said.
Understand. Yeah.
Okay. I'm clear now in my own mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt and then Councillor Ledger.
Yes. I'm still not happy about this at all. There's no reason to write out a letter to the town councils or parish councils asking them what they think about our policy. We've agreed the policy in cabinet and we're agreeing it now. There's no need to go out for consultation. We're just wasting time. That's my view.
Chair, can I respond to that, please?
Of course, please do.
Just to remind members that obviously Cabinet have already made that decision back in October last year. So if you didn't want to consult, you'd have to go back and recommend to the Cabinet that you didn't consult. I think that's it, really. It is just to make members mindful of that. But the second thing is, of course, the draft, it is still a draft policy. So whilst Cabinet gave agreement, they gave agreement in principle. So that leaves, obviously, some manipulation if you want to make some changes. So I would say it would do no harm to go out and consult, as Cabinet have basically asked for that to happen. And as Tim had already outlined, that just hasn't been able to be delivered yet. So just to come back to Councillor Pratt, I don't think it would do any harm, and if nothing else, it helps to engage the town and parishes as much as possible and be as transparent as possible, which is what I believe this administration is all about at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie.
Debbie, I agree with what you've just said, and I withdraw the point I was making.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Just before I bring in Councillor Ledger, again, abusing my position slightly. So we had a discussion at a recent meeting about the level of responses to the affordable housing document, where we sent out thousands and we received 22 responses, I believe. One of my own parish councils actually had an agenda item last night to discuss their policy on responding to East Devon District Council consultations. This one was particularly about the Clist Valley Regional Park. And they agreed that some of them are not pertinent to them. And if they're not pertinent, they would not respond. However, if it's something they have an interest in, they're very interested to receive them and would want to continue to do so. So I do take your point, Councillor Pratt, that we don't want to slow this process down. But thank you, Debbie, for your clarification. And yes, I think, you know, I speak for myself, you know, consultation is important. It's certainly important to this administration. And this is a draft policy. And if the town and parish councils, when we go out, come back to a council and say, no, it's not, we want to tweak it, we want to revise it, then we listen to them. You know, that's why you consult. You don't do it with, you know, with your blinkers on. You do it because you want to receive positive feedback and constructive criticism. And I would still like to put my recommendation forward. Councillor Ledger, my apologies, I've kept you waiting.
No problem at all, Chair. It's just really just to tease out a bit more detail on the timelines. Obviously, you've just proposed a 6-week consultation, and Tim Charles just alluded that he might not be able to do it in the 2nd week of January. That takes us past the window for the AMF next year. So are we going to be considering the responses to this in the end of Q2 really? It's just to tease out a bit more detail on that.
Thank you. Tim?
If I could just come in on that. So, you know, I just want to clarify that because there was a potential for some misunderstanding. So we've committed as officers that the consultation will commence prior to the next AMF. It may well be that actually we have the responses by the next AMF, but I suspect we won't. I'm keen that we don't unnecessarily delay this. So it might be that, because I think that this is a really important area of work for AMF. So it could be that actually we hold a special AMF just to discuss the community asset responses when they come back, so that we're not delaying things unnecessarily for another 3 months.
Fantastic, thanks, Tim.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say that, again, we keep reverting back to this point, that had we not had a pandemic, we would have been well ahead of the curve by now, and we would have been probably had done the consultation, we'd have had a policy, and would have cracked on. But, you know, to coin that phrase that Councillor Loudon uses, we are where we are, so we must do it as quickly as we can and press on. Thank you, Councillor Arnott. I've seen your message. I quite understand you've got to dash away in a moment. I hope that provides some clarity to members of the forum, so that the next steps, the recommendation is that we are assessing the continuing suitability of the draft policy. It has been approved by Cabinet already. And as Debbie points out, the issue here is whether or not we consult. And I'd like to propose from the chair that we do consult as quickly as we can, subject to the officer resource that Tim has pointed out. And if we can get the responses back, the consultation done by the next AMF, fantastic. If not, we accept that it'll have to be considered at the AMF after that. Unless, of course, we can crowbar an extra one in to try and judiciously speed things along. So that's the... I'm sorry, I beg your pardon.
I'm just saying I'm happy to second that.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Ledger. So it's proposed and second. So can I ask members using the usual green and red to indicate your vote, please? Over to you, Debbie.
For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is underway. And that's 5 votes for the motion with no abstentions, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Debbie. I appreciate that. Well, thank you, members. Again, that was a long discussion. Councillor Arnott, I need your dashing, and Councillor Ledger. So obviously I'm going to try and, without glossing over things, move straight to agenda item 10, commercial investment. So Tim, if you'd like to present now. I'm mindful that I don't want to lose so many members that we're not quorate, and we have got an item 12 that we need to cover as well. But that's not to say, you know, talk really fast, but I don't want to lose everyone before we have a chance to give it proper debate. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Commercial investments. So this is a report or an agenda item that I bring to all AMF meetings, as indeed the Commercial Investment Framework requires me to. The report that you have in front of you covers two issues. The first is that since the last AMF meeting, we've subsequently acquired under the investment fund the Ocean building in Exmouth. That has subsequently been considered by Cabinet, and you've got a link within your report to that to that Cabinet report. So I'm not proposing to go into any detail on Ocean in this meeting. I suppose for me the more important element that hopefully to come out of this meeting is the second part, which is around having acquired Ocean. For the time being, we're not actively progressing any other commercial investments, partly due to the pandemic, but also really whilst we sort of get new direction on the appetite by the new leadership on commercial investment. So the appetite. So but secondly, the process to be followed to align the council's priorities and its response to supporting economic recovery from the pandemic and to providing quality, social and affordable housing. So for me, through the Cabinet meeting that I attended, I think it was at late September or early October, there were certain themes that came out of that meeting, and one of those themes was around the decision making, which was in accordance with the framework, but there was concern around that, particularly the lack of involvement with ward members. So, as I said, sort of a steer would be great. Certainly, the beginning of a steer, perhaps through this particular meeting, as to the potential appetite for commercial investment, particularly where we can invest commercially, but by doing so, really it's a direct intervention in terms of supporting the recovery from COVID, but also potentially around social and affordable housing. And if we've got that appetite, then how we do it? Do we do it under the existing investment framework, or do members wish to explore something else?
Thank you. So, as always, may I invite non-members of the forum to raise their blue hand if they wish to contribute to this item. I have none. I'm delighted to see that Councillor Ledger has put his hand up, who I was going to immediately call upon in his strategic planning portfolio role. Councillor Ledger, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go on where Tim's last point, really, what I'd like to see, a slight change, is that if we are going to follow the same framework, that we involve ward members in the decisions that are made. So it's not just the members of this forum, but also the ward members in the ward, so that they're up to date and aware of any commercial investment that we're going to undertake within their ward. I think it's a courtesy to them, but obviously under confidential matters. But I think that's required. What I'd also like to see is a focus. I've been speaking with Ed Freeman about urban capacity studies that we've got for the district and possible areas of locations which are able to be developed, and a lot more focus being undertaken on that, so that we can look for opportunities within the district and utilise them for, be that social good or purely from a commercial point of view. That's what I'd like to see come forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Rowland.
Jack.
I had unmuted myself. I knew it would happen at some point today. Just like to endorse what Councillor Ledger said. He made the very first point he made was something I was going to cover as well. So thanks for that, Councillor Ledger. I'd like to see obviously we haven't been exposed as much as some other councils to previous commercial investment things that have happened now, where we could be in a situation which could really embarrass us as a council to do with our finances. So that is a blessing. But going forward, I would certainly like to see longer term investment decisions being made regarding social housing. I'm not particularly thinking it has to be a return within a shorter space of time, but looking at it as a longer term investment for the benefit of people that are desperately in need of better quality social housing at a reasonable rent, because that is an issue that is going to become more and more paramount post-COVID. My apologies, that's my mobile going off yet again. I'll finish now anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. I mean, members will be aware that at the last Cabinet, an agreement was reached to provide some additional resourcing for the economy team. And within that is an officer resource to look at investment opportunities, both external and internal, to maximise our assets, consider assets that will help the economy of the district as we come out of COVID, and hopefully that is as soon as possible. Could I possibly ask, Simon's disappeared off the screen, whether Tim and Simon, oh, hello, sorry to put you two on the spot, hello. Could you just share with us, what impact the announcement by Mr. Sunak MP in the spending review on council's investment rules, what impact that might have on our current investment strategy, or where it might take us in the direction of? Would that be okay? I'd quite appreciate if you don't know.
No, that's a really good point, Chair. There is a significant change that's come in terms of borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board. So the announcement through the settlement basically banned local authorities to borrow if their main purpose is to buy assets just for yield. So for commercial investment, that your only objective is to make a return on that borrowing, if you like. So that's been banned overnight. And it's quite a blunt instrument in some respect, in that if local authorities have in their capital programme, they have to submit 3 years capital programme in advance to PWLB if they're looking at taking out loans. If there is a capital commercial investment in there, you're not allowed to borrow at all from the PWLB. So they have been, they're pretty clear now. They've tried to bring in different rules, different measures to stop authorities or put authorities off borrowing for commercial means, but now they've been really clear. So that's pretty straightforward. There is, though, that is around if yield is the main objective of your purchase and what you're borrowing for. Yield can be a second objective, a smaller objective. So if your first one is around economic regeneration, something around promoting the district, jobs, or all those other objectives that a council might have, if that's the main objective of why you're borrowing for a particular project, if yield then comes in on the back of that, then we've got to wait for all the finer detail to come through, but that's my understanding at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Tim?
So yeah, just picking up on what Simon has said. So yeah, that's my understanding, which takes us to a position whereby we have a commercial investment framework, which as it stands now is an adopted framework that has 20 million in it, or 20 million provided for. It has half of that in a income only fund, which was driven purely by commercial return, whether that be within or outside of district. And then you have the second 10 million fund, which is where there's that catalytic effect, so where there's jobs growth, where it contributes towards placemaking or similar. Now, based on what we have heard last week, I think at the very least it means that the income only fund is, well, I think by its very name, perhaps it seemed like a good idea at the time, but perhaps now, unfortunate in terms of name, would probably, if we were to try and invest in the income only fund, we're probably going against that latest guidance. So in any event, we would need to amend the framework to that respect. I've also heard others talk, Councillor Rowland and Ledger, about involving ward members, which currently isn't included within the framework. So I think at the very least there are some changes perhaps needed.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ledger, do you want to come back in?
Yes, just to really make a proposal that we recommend the changes stated just by Tim Charles there to the framework, and that we also recommend the change that I mentioned earlier about the ward members. Well, that's just a proposal for myself.
Thank you. I'll ask for a seconder in a moment. I suppose, yes, the key thing is the world has changed. You know, the central government is recognising that and has made the changes that Simon alluded to. And I suppose it is the focus is what is the purpose of the district council? We know we've got to commercialise because the monies we receive from central government are being constrained and being reduced. But it comes back to, and certainly something I have a core belief in, is why do councils exist? And they exist to provide a social service, an amenity services to residents. That really is, for me, is the founding cornerstone of any council. You're there because your residents need you to be there and you deliver services. Now, of course, within that, wrapped up, is the commercial element. We've got to wash our own face, and Simon has a battle every year to make sure that we have a balanced budget. But the ability to have a pool of money to both generate a yield second, so it still becomes viable to do it, but also to enhance delivery of social amenity, be that housing or play space, recreation space, economic space, is a great potential. And it's very exciting to be in that position. You know, for those councils who have bought a shopping centre in Macclesfield, I'm sure that there was a great reason behind it, but some of them are now, those chickens are coming home to roost. Thankfully, as Councillor Rowland said, we're not in that position. We can now focus our attention on the social good and delivering good quality, green, eco-friendly social housing. For me, has certainly got to be at the top of that list. That's just delivering a basic human need, and we can do it, and we can, you know, we can get some revenue out of it as well. So, well, would any other member of the forum? I have some other questions. Just before I bring in Jack and Jeff, Tim, over to you again, sir.
Thank you. So far we've covered the ward member element. We've also covered the income only fund. So the other area, which certainly got some debate at cabinet, was around the decision making allowed for within the framework, and the decision at the time by the then Deputy Chief Exec to invest, which now sits with the Chief Exec. So it's whether moving forward within the framework that remains. Now, I suppose as officers, I think the opportunity to have a framework which sets out how we will consider investments, and the key reason for this, well, there were two key reasons. Firstly, to help in terms of the decision making, but predominantly and firstly, it was around setting out the types of investments we'd consider and those that we wouldn't consider, and how we would score those, so that we didn't, as an authority, lose track of what we were seeking to achieve. So the framework set out the sorts of investments we were looking for, how we'd score, how we dismiss other ones, and that was the core purpose. But if we are to invest commercially moving forward, then having a framework is really, really key. But a framework that is supported by members. So we've mentioned a couple bits that could be changed. I'm just putting out there, I wonder about a possible recommendation from this committee that back to cabinet possibly, that there be a review possibly of that framework, if that's what members are looking to see, because there may be other bits in it as well that you wish to take back to cabinet. As I said, for officers, it's extremely valuable having something in place that tells us what it is you're looking to do and how we can deliver it, but it needs to be something that members fully support.
Thank you, Tim. Just before I bring in Jack and Jeff, I think that's a very fair point. I am mindful of the time. That's not a reason why it shouldn't be discussed, but I think we must give this the proper discussion it deserves, especially if there's going to be recommendations that come back to cabinet. And yes, you do need a steer, you need a framework, and that framework needs to be well thought out and have as much contribution from non-members of the forum, members of council, and the forum itself. That's just my view on it. Jack, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Chair. I was simply going to be seconding what has been put forward, but just hearing what Tim said as well, which is a very valid point about the delegated authority. So perhaps we can cover that in a review with a recommendation to come forward against it to the next cabinet meeting. But I would like to second what Councillor Ledger put forward as well.
So that's just the two amendments pro tem.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Pratt? Jeff?
Yes, originally I objected to these investments on the basis that there was very little councillor involvement in the decision making. So the way I see this, following on from what Tim has just said, the officers will advise, and then the 6 members of the forum will make a decision, and presumably then it will go to cabinet. And I think is that how we should be dealing with this? There's long as there's a councillor involvement. Also the ward member should be added in as per what Dan has said. But that's the way I think it should be dealt with. The decision making will firstly be with the 6 members of the forum plus the ward members, and then it will go to cabinet. But all decisions will be private because we're dealing with acquisitions which are being dealt with in the future.
Thank you, Jeff. I was just going to ask Tim to come back on that and just seek some clarity in that. But on that final point was going to be my last point, that most of this reluctantly but necessarily would have to be done in Part B, because we are talking about commercial acquisitions where information coming into the public domain might actually adversely affect the ability to get a good deal.
Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely. Yeah, it needs to be commercially sensitive. In terms of the decision making, there are pros and cons of different routes, which we explored with members when we first drew this up. So there are downsides to what Councillor Pratt has put forward. There are also upsides, but it's about getting the balance right. We've still got within that 20 million available fund, we've still got over 17 million left. And I can see, I think as I said earlier, I can see the investment framework or a investment framework being a really, really key tool to helping us move forward and make direct interventions to support COVID recovery. But it needs to be on a framework, under a framework that works and is supported. I'm sort of thinking out aloud now, but members of AMF have come up with a couple of suggestions. I just wonder if perhaps the merits of a small working group of some kind, just to review it in a bit more detail and put something back, because what I wouldn't want to do is put something back to cabinet and then there to be something else that comes out at a later date that perhaps we need to look at changing. So I just wonder about, and I think there's large elements of that framework which I don't think there is much disagreement about, but it's just particular areas. So I'm just putting it out there, some kind of a working group to review it.
Tim, when you say a working group, do you mean a working group consisting of the members of the forum plus the ward member?
No, Councillor Pratt, a working group. So a working group to consider the framework, not a particular investment. So it wouldn't relate to ward members. I was proposing a working group of senior officers and selected members to then put something back potentially to AMF and then back to cabinet. There will be some things within that working group which I suspect will need to, because as I said, there are pros and cons to different approaches, and I probably wouldn't want to debate those in public forum, because this is around commercial investment. But I don't know. I just I'm trying to get to a position whereby we have a framework which works and which we can move forward with.
Thank you, Tim. On that basis, Dan, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I was just saying I'm happy to take that as an amendment.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, that we set up a small task and finish. It's just we need to get this going.
We do.
Yeah.
So are you happy to sort of park the revisions that you proposed and just sort of drop those into the overall substantive proposal to set up a TAF, just to consider that?
We can just say that that's a suggestion from the current AMF, and then the TAF take that forward with the suggestions we've already mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I take on board entirely what you say, Councillor Pratt, that having ward member involvement is important. It's part of the democratic process. But I'm also minded that if the deal of the century came up before us the day after an AMF that wasn't due to meet for another 3 months, effectively, by putting it back that the AMF has to decide on that investment, the potential could be lost. It's a hypothetical situation. So I think that from what you propose, the working party, the TAF, whatever we call it, to tease that out and come up with some pragmatic, practical steps that everyone's happy with, that are democratic, but allow that element of reactivity, I think would be very worthwhile. So from the chair, I'm happy to propose that is the recommendation of the AMF, that we form that, call it what you will, TAF working party, working group, to reassess and revise the investment framework document.
Chair, may I just query that a second?
Of course, yes.
So you're probably aware we've already got a number of TAFs.
Yes.
In terms of numbers, political proportionality, those aspects, I mean, respect that you want to involve as many members as possible. Could it not be as straightforward as having a special meeting of the Asset Management Forum, have it as an open invitation to the whole membership, all of the district councillors, to then look at the review, speak it through with officers, but it is effectively a private session in case there is any reference to specific commercial investments. I know that's not the intention, but sometimes those things do slip into the conversation. Rather than going through the process of trying to get representation onto a new working group or forum, which might take some time, add some delay. I'm just thinking in practical terms, this could be something that could happen perhaps in late January, early February. Of course, that's subject to Tim and his team's availability, and then that would feed back to something where you've got a revised draft, as it were, of the framework for your March meeting, that then again members have another opportunity to speak to who attend the forum, and then you can recommend to cabinet from there.
Thank you, Debbie. You should be a politician. That's a cracking suggestion. And mindful of what Henry has to do every time we set up a TAF and balance it, that's a very good idea. If members of the forum are happy to have an extraordinary. Tim.
Thank you, Debbie, and that was just along the same lines. I wasn't necessarily seeing this as another TAF being set up. My initial thought was actually a working group of AMF members to meet once in a closed meeting just for AMF members, to then report back to the next AMF meeting in March, which is, of course, a public meeting which all members can attend, rather than having a working group attended by all members. But that was just my thought. I don't, it's just a suggestion.
Okay, so we have sort of two slight changes there. What's the forum preference? Is it to have an AMF in Part B that's open to everybody, or just an AMF in Part B where we revise the commercial framework and then that's a recommendation for members to chew over and consider? Members?
We should be done.
Yes, I agree with that. We just have a meeting with the AMF members.
Okay, so extraordinary AMF, just to consider that one item.
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Ledger?
I would actually say the opposite. I think we should be as democratically broad whenever we can. So if we can draw on opinions of members from outside of the AMF that can feed into this, I think it will see a lot more support when it does come further on down the line.
Okay, Jack?
You're muted.
Oh, you're muted, Jack.
Sorry, Chair. I think I agree with the latter point that was just made by Councillor Ledger.
Okay, thank you. Just coming back to Debbie, from a legal perspective, democratic perspective, is that permissible for an AMF to be held in Part B with open to all council members?
Yeah, I mean, you depending on what you call it, whether it's a briefing or whatever it might be, but I just think because of the nature of what you're discussing, there is that danger that you realm into areas that live in Part B. So it's entirely your choice, members, whether you include everyone or not. That's your decision.
Okay, Jeff, are you happy with that sort of consensus view without the chair being involved? That make it as broad as possible and just ask all members for input. You know, 54 members may decide they don't want to have an input, and it will just come down to us 6.
I can't agree that, I'm afraid.
No. Okay.
I support what Tim's just said, that it should be left for the members of the AFM.
Okay. Right. Well, in that case, we have a recommendation from Councillor Ledger, supported by Councillor Rowland. There's only 4 of us here. I'd like, could you indicate with the green ticks that we go with the proposal that there's an extraordinary AMF held in Part B, confidential session, but that all members of council are invited to participate?
So, Chair, you have 3 votes for the motion and 1 vote against.
Okay, thank you very much, members. Apologies, Councillor Pratt, that's not what you're feeling, but that's what we'll do moving forwards. So that concludes this item. We now come to agenda item 11, exclusion of the press and public. So that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public, including the press, be excluded from the meeting as exempt information of the description set out in the agenda is likely to be disclosed, and on balance, the public interest is in discussing this item in private session, Part B. Members, we will take a short break while the live stream is stopped.